What is up, harvesters? My name is Ken. Welcome to Hobby Harvest. So a lot of you have been dealing with a horrible drought this year. A lot of you guys are wondering, can I still get a food plot in? There's others of you that are wondering, hey, is it too late to get in a food plot if I didn't do it already? And the answer is yes, you guys can. But yeah, you're gonna have some challenges that maybe other people didn't face who have been able to, start this spring and continue putting in and putting the work in and getting those food plots established all year. But you guys still can do it. Obviously, we're gonna need some rain at some point, but as we get closer into the fall, we start to get more and more precipitation. We get those temperature drops, and that really just brings the moisture out of the clouds and down here so we can get some rain. So, have faith, you'll get that rain eventually, and you'll be able to have a successful food plot this fall. Now, what we need to do though is we're gonna only be focused on that fall focused forage seed or food plot at this time. So that's what I put in anyway. So you came to the right place. I'll tell you guys how to do it. If maybe you have some failed clover or you tried putting something else in earlier and it just has not been growing, it's been, bad drought condition. Luckily here in southeastern Wisconsin, we have not had that bad of a drought this year. We did last year though, so I feel for you guys. I dealt with that. I was trying to get switchgrass established last year and that just did not work for me. But what we're not going to be able to do is behind me, you can see that I have a summer cover crop of buckwheat in. Now it's too late in the year to try to get that in now, but that doesn't mean we can't plant without it. It's just a nice way to build your soil and get that thatch down on top of your seed, but we can still plant seed just into bare exposed dirt. So that brings me to the first thing we need to do if you're trying to get a food plot established now, and that's we need to get some exposed soil. So what I would recommend doing today, because you're gonna need as much time as possible right now, you're kind of behind already, is to spray just glyphosate. I know we always talk about using glyphosate and 2,4-D. I would not use 2,4-D now because we're going to be planting really shortly here. So if you have the opportunity, get a spraying of glyphosate down, get as much of the weeds and other things killed off. Depending on what your food plot looks like. If you're dealing with drought and some of your crop came up but all of it didn't come up, sometimes in that situation, you're gonna still have some of those weeds that came up that are more drought resistant. So you're going to wanna get those killed off and maybe start from scratch. You guys are gonna have to look at your plots and make that call for yourselves if you wanna seed into what you already have established or if you wanna just completely wipe it and start over. So get that spraying down right away if that's what you're trying to do. Again, if you're putting in a new food plot and you are just trying to get started this year, get that spraying down right away. We want to have as little weed competition as possible. Now we can also talk about disking, tilling, cultivating, whatever, trying to get some exposed soil that way. Now the problem with that is you're going to bring a lot of those dormant noxious weed seeds to the surface, and you're going to actually probably do more harm than good this time of year if you were going to start in spring and just keep tilling and disking or cultivating over and over and over again, letting those weeds come up, bury them under and let the more seeds come up. Eventually that would work to get weed free, but we don't have enough time to do that now. So I would highly recommend just get that one spraying in and we'll try to get as much exposed soil that way. Now, planting time and what to plant. So for planting time, we'll cover that quickly first. I'm actually going to be planting my northwestern Wisconsin food plots this week. It's the first week of August. So if you guys are kind of in that line with the northern part of Wisconsin, the UP, northern part of Minnesota, and just kind of carry that across the state wherever you guys happen to be, the first week of August is a great time to get those fall focused forage seeds down. Now down here in southeastern Wisconsin, I'm not going to plant down here until probably the second or third week of August, depending on when I have time. Both are perfectly okay to plant around just the middle of August for down here. So again, if you carry that southern part of Wisconsin line across the country, you're looking at mid-August as your plant date. And if you're further south, you have to start considering when the start of your season is and where you want the growth of your plants to be at the start of your season. And if you guys are way down south, I'm sure you're working with something like clover or chicory or something like that down there anyway. So you're not going to be doing these more fall-focused, cold-resistant mixes that we do up here in the north. So now that you know when to plant, the idea is to get as weed-free and as competition-free in your plots right now while you still have maybe a week or two, depending on where you're at, or maybe only a few days. But then what you want to do is get that seed down. Now, when we're talking about a fall-focused forage mix of seeds, you want as much diversity in your plots as you can get, because when we're talking about food plots, the whole reason of putting them in the first place is to create that number one food source in the area, because we know that the deer will base all of their daily movement around that number one food source in their area. Now, the problem with that is the number one food source to them changes all the time. So that's why, like in the middle of the night, they go out and they wander around. We hear bucks have a 3-mile range. Well, what they're doing during that time is when it first started to get dark out, but right before dark, they go to that favorite number one food source. This is why we try to get that, because that's how we're going to get them during the daylight. But then they browse through that, they feed on it a little bit, and then they start just wandering around all night. That's where you get that 3-mile range. The does and fawns don't go that far, but that's when they start looking like, hey, did something else pop up? Is there some other, be it a farm field, be it a food plot, be it an apple tree, be it anything in their home range that ranks higher than what they considered to be that number one food source? And then they will actually shift their daily movement to that number one food source if it indeed changes for them. So that's why you want to plant a diverse food plot, because at any given week, any given night, one of the things that you put in that food plot might be the number one food in their area. So I know we look at it like as the food plot as a whole, but if you say plant a cereal grain, maybe that cereal grain is the number one thing in the entire range of the herd, so they relate to that cereal grain. But then maybe next week it's your brassicas, maybe the next week it's a bean, maybe it's a pea, maybe it's whatever you put in there. So my food plots are always planted in a diverse mix that is fall focused. So I'll tell you what I'm planting in this plot. And so in this plot, I talk about this in other videos. This plot is in the shape of like a boomerang or a U shape. And I explain why that's hugely advantageous to us to not just have like a square food plot in my other videos. So go check those out. They're on my channel and you'll be able to find those pretty easily. But I actually plant the entire U in 2 strips. So it actually kind of goes like this. I don't plant like half and half. It's actually 2 full strips all the way through the entire plot. So with this food plot planted in that diverse fall focused forage mix, what ends up happening is in half of the plot, I have beans and peas planted. Now those are forage soybeans and forage peas. Now that means that those plants are more focused on growing like lush leafy greens than actually growing like the beans or the peas that you would harvest off of them. And so that makes them a lot more browse resistant or forage resistant. So there's actually a lot more food for the deer in each square foot of the plot than if they were trying to grow for like what an egg field would grow for, like actually harvesting beans or peas off of them. So I plant forage soybeans, forage peas on half of the plot, and I actually throw down a cereal grain as a nurse crop for those, and that's just so that that cereal grain pops up. If the deer are gonna browse on it right away, hopefully they hit up that cereal grain instead of those beans and peas when they're very young, because if they nip them off then they're gonna kill them and I'm not gonna get a lot of growth. So that's just to help me get those beans and peas to a much more mature age where they're more browse tolerant and the deer don't kill them off on me. Now I use whatever cereal grain's cheapest. I think I'm using oats this year, but you just throw that down. You just want something to pop up just a little bit. The deer will browse it down, or maybe it will grow, but you're not trying to plant it so thick that it'll choke off your peas and beans. It's just a little bit of something out there to give the deer a couple weeks of food until those beans and peas are more well established so that they don't kill them. Now on the other half of the plot, I plant brassicas. Now those are a lot more winter or late fall focused. You don't really see the deer browsing on those too much right away. So that's, again, when I'm talking about you want your food plot to be the #1 food source in the area. As soon as you plant it, the first thing that's gonna pop up are those cereal grains. Those cereal grains may very well be the #1 food source in your entire area just by themselves. So then those beans and those peas start to grow up, and now those might be the number one food source in your entire area. So the deer stay relating to your area, even though those cereal grains have grown up and are less desirable to the deer herd at that time. Then we head into winter or into late fall. It starts getting cold out and those brassicas start to get really attractive to the deer. Then they're focused on those brassicas. But at the same time now we're considering where the egg fields and stuff in the area are getting harvested. So now all of a sudden those beans and peas, even though they're dried out and dead and maybe are sitting in a few inches of snow, because every other twig out here lost its leaves, it's still a high quality food source in the area because those deer simply don't have anything else in the area other than, you know, your red osier, dogwood, your browse, your things like that. But because those beans are still standing, because the corn's still standing, again, if you guys are trying to get food plots in now, you're too late to get corn in, but those beans and those peas will stay standing for you and be a high quality food source even into, say, December, even though the attractiveness of them in December is not as good as it is in September. But because everything else out here declined, it's still that number one food source. So we're always just trying to have that number one food source. The deer will relate to it. That's what they'll focus all of their daily movement around, their daytime movement and their daily movement around. And that's how you're going to have your best chance at harvesting them. So in my northwestern Wisconsin property, there is no ag up there. It's big woods country. It is extremely easy for me to have the number one food source in the area. I can plant buckwheat like I have here, and they will relate to that buckwheat as the number one food source in the area where they barely touch it down here. So using it just as a summer cover crop, of course, I'm not actually planting it to attract the deer during the summer, but because up there I'm dealing with just big woods and no ag, there's a lot of high canopies, there's not a lot of good undergrowth, there's a lot of ferns and other plants that grow in acidic soil. So as soon as I put something in that's a little bit sweeter tasting, the deer flock right to it and set up all of their daily movement around it. So then when I actually get my fall focused food plots in up there, it's easy. I don't even have to have a high quality food plot. It'll still be the number one food source in the area. They'll relate their movement around it. Now down here, southeastern Wisconsin, I have a lot more competition. There's ag all over around here. There's a hayfield right next door here. The farmer actually just cut it a couple days ago. Now I'm not too worried about that hayfield. It's a lot of clover and alfalfa and native grasses that grow in that. It's real easy to have a higher quality food source than that. I'm not too worried about that, but there's a lot of bean fields, corn fields, cereal grain fields in the area, even though those cereal grains are being harvested right about this time of year. So again, I'm not too worried about those. But what happens then when I plant beans and peas together, I'm now providing that diversity. So I'm giving them the beans, which they can get anywhere, but I'm also putting those peas in there, and that makes that more desirable to them. And it's also important that since I'm planting in August and those other beans were planted months ago, those young tender beans are a lot more attractive to the deer than those months-old beans that are starting to dry out for harvest coming up here. So again, it'll bump me up on the list of food sources they have available to them. You always want to be up near the top, even though they have all of these other ones in there. And like I said, they'll cruise around and they'll check out to make sure another one didn't move its way up that line to the top, because then they'll start focusing on that. So you don't want that to happen. Now I also have neighbors who plant food plots. They plant clover plots. Again, not too worried about those. As we head into the fall hunting season, those clover plots, although they were very attractive to the deer during the summer, are going to start to decline as the weather cools down, and my food plot's going to start to bump up. So even though those clover food plots were maybe up here, I'm going to move my way up ahead of them. The deer will start relating to my food plot over those food plots. So that's just something to consider. You got to figure out what's in your area, what your neighbors are doing, what ag is in your area. It's hard to tell you what to plant. I tell you what I plant, but that doesn't mean that that's what you should plant. You got to consider what's in your area. The best bet though is diversity. Get as many different things growing in your food plot as you can, but not things that compete with each other. So a lot of those bags you can buy at the big box stores with a picture of the big buck on the front of them, you read through the seed list in there, and I'd shake my head at a lot of those, that it's like, why would you plant these things together? Because this one's going to choke out this one's never even going to grow. but they put it in there just to say that it's their proprietary mix or whatever, and that's fine. I'm all for that. Guys plant that stuff and they have success with it, but there is some seeds put in there that are just never going to grow because the other stuff in it chokes it out. And if that's what you're doing, like, it's easier to just go to your co-op, go to your feed and seed in your area, buy seed by, you know, the unmarked 50-pound brown bag at a time. It's cheaper that way. You guys can work on your own mixes. You can see what works year to year. You can figure out, you know, what competes with other things. So like brassicas, they take a long time to get started, and you don't want to plant anything that's going to like grow over them and choke them out, because then they just won't get established. So brassicas need to be planted by themselves. You can go and, like I said, go to those big box stores and you'll see that there's brassicas listed inside that are mixed in with like other plants that are going to grow over the top of them, and just never let them get going. So that's, you know, something to consider. If you guys like to use those mixes and they've worked for you, by all means go continue using them, but you can really just save some money and save some hassle by going to your co-op, get those 50-pound bags and just make your own mixes and plant those instead. They work out great. You don't need a bunch of different stuff in that mix that's not going to grow anyway just to get that diversity. It's much better to plant them separate in strips in your food plots in order to get the diversity that way. So again, if you guys haven't been able to get anything growing in your plots yet, or you're just starting, don't worry about it. You can still have success this season. I mean, you got to get started like real quick here. Like I said, I would recommend getting as weed free as you can right now, and then plant based on where you're at in the country. I mean, if you're in that northern part, you're considering planting this week already. As we move south, you can just keep adding weeks to it, but you guys can still have a very successful season this year. We're going to focus now on those fall focused plantings, those beans, those peas, those winter grains, those brassicas. Do what's best for your area, whatever's not in your area, but Foolproof Plan is just as diverse of a food plot as you can get, because any given week, one of those things in that food plot can be the thing that's popping and raises its attractiveness to the top of the list in that deer's entire range that they're covering on any given day. They'll then focus on your food source. They'll hit your food source up first, which is the one right before it gets dark out. That's when you're going to have those deer on your food plots. That's when you're going to have a shot on them during the daylight. And then they'll head off and they'll go look for their number 2, number 3 on down the list, other food sources in the area, and hopefully somebody else isn't providing something that bumps you down the list, and then they start focusing on that. So, you know, keep that food going, keep that diversity going, keep that attractiveness going, and I hope you guys have a lot of success this season. If you guys feel like you got some value out of this video, go ahead, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It's free, it doesn't cost you guys anything, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.